Good afternoon, everybody. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this webinar. We have an incredibly esteemed panel, including Dr. Abdelaziz Al-Aweshik, Assistant Secretary General of the Gulf Cooperation Council, Abdul Malik Al-Alawi of the Moroccan Strategic Intelligence Institute, John Marks of Cross Border Information and formerly of Chatham House, Lilia Hashim Nas of, in this context, the Maghreb Economic Forum, but also who has a separate United Nations mandate, and Dr. Adil Malik of the esteemed University of Oxford. We're discussing today the integration, or rather lack of, in the Maghreb countries, despite great similarities of historical experience, faith, culture, religion, etc. There are great disparities in terms of trade in the Maghreb region, and it remains the least economically integrated region in Africa, and by some studies, the least economically integrated in the world. I'm going to go through speaker by speaker in the way that you see them laid out on the flyer and on the slides. And then when each speaker has finished, we will open up to some questions from the audience. We have 90 minutes from this, and it's my great pleasure to invite Dr. Abdelaziz Al-Aweshik, who is Assistant Secretary General at the Gulf Cooperation Council, to discuss a little about how, in his experience at the Gulf Cooperation Council, which is now 40 years of age, I think last month, how the differing developmental disparities in his region, despite the strong binds of tribe, of religion, of experience, of climate, and even, as he was telling me in his office earlier this week, of economy, the Gulf countries, when they first unified, were all oil producers. There was no need for them to trade with each other. So for him to introduce based on his own experience will be very helpful, and then I'll proceed to John. So thank you very much for joining us, and thank you to the King Faisal Center for indeed hosting us.
Thank you, Zaid, and thank you to King Faisal Center, to Maha and Sarah and Dr. Saoud Al-Sarhan and all the staff. Thank you very much for organizing this and for inviting me to be part of this distinguished group of experts. I can only speak about the benefits and also some of the challenges of integration over the last 40 years. 40 years ago, some people forget that this region was among the poorest in the world, in fact. Four of our member states lived under British rule for about 200 years. Kuwait got its independence in 1961, but the rest got their independence in 1971. Just a few years before the GCC was started, Saudi Arabia was never colonized, but there were different levels of development economically, institutionally. There were hardly any government structure to speak of in some of our member states. Oman and UAE, for example, were really at the bottom of the development scale, globally. Even within the UAE, there were differences between the different emirates. Some of the GCC member states before the GCC were providing assistance to the UAE for development, for education and economic development, and of course Oman. But despite that, despite the heterogeneity in the development and institutional structure, the GCC was started integrating in 1981, first through an FTA between member states, 1983, and then a customs union, Common Market 2008, Customs Union 2003, and integration also outside the economic field started by in the first 2 years, in fact, both at the internal security level and the military level, where we built up from the Peninsula Shield until 2018, where we established the Unified Military Command. There is also a GCC police force based in UAE, and the Unified Military Command is based in Saudi Arabia. So despite the heterogeneity, the GCC was able to integrate at all of these levels. I think probably there were two main reasons for the success. One is economic. The windfall from the oil wealth helped oil the development and the integration process. But the second one is a political and security impetus because of the threats faced by this region. And because of and politically, all of these 5 countries are stable monarchies. And so it was natural for them to integrate and coordinate among themselves. I can speak also about the benefits of integration. I started by saying that our member states were at the low rungs of development in 1981. If you look at the GDP, for example, the combined GDP in 1980, the year before the GCC was established, about $250 billion. And today is about 1.6 trillion. Before COVID, it was slightly larger, about 1.8, but it has shrunk now. It's about 1.65 trillion dollars, about six and a half fold increase in GDP. And if you look at the social indicators as well, if you look at the literacy rate, for example, there was a dramatic change. The average literacy rate in the GCC in 1980 was about 65%. Today is over 95%. The health indicators are even more dramatic. In 1980, the infant mortality rate was about 80 per 1,000 live births. That means the number of babies dying during their first year out of 1,000 live births was about 80, and today is about 5. And so on. I think all the indicators show that the benefits of integration. And I think we're hoping that, Zaid pointed out that the Maghreb region or the North Africa region has been among the least integrated. So if the GCC experiences any lesson, there'll definitely be a lot to gain from greater integration among the Maghreb countries. And I look forward to listening to your analysis. And thank you very much again for having me.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abdulaziz. And I think the 2 key points from what you said was that the genesis was through the customs union, and the great accelerator was the security threat. So I'm wondering whether we can caveat our discussions on North Africa on whether the economic imperatives made clear by the pandemic in a region where a lot of the economy is run through the informal workforce could provide the same impetus that the very real revolution in Iran in 1979 is what drove these leaders to the table subsequently. John, I would love to start with you.
Thank you.
And without further ado, what are your thoughts?
Well, Zaid, thank you very much. It was very interesting hearing Dr. Abdulaziz there, wasn't it? You know, the GCC experience, it's had its ups and downs. We're only just coming out of the Qatar boycott, for example, but it really has had a lot of success as well, based on an economic logic, based on cultural integration within the region, and based on mutual defence interests, as Dr. Abdulaziz pointed out. Peninsula Shield, there have been external enemies before the GCC, leading to giving it impetus with the situation with Iran in the late 1970s, and then coming on with other mutual enemies much later, Saddam Hussein's Iraq. And I think this is very pertinent because I'll come back to this in a bit. But clearly one of the big issues, or the biggest issue for me in the Maghreb, is that the enemies, much as people may like to criticize the former colonial power and others, the real enemies perceived within the region are far too often, over many decades, within the region itself, stopping that integration. But if you'll permit me, can I just go back a few decades to actually situate what we're talking about? And we're talking about the unity of the Maghreb, the Arab Maghreb Union, which used its very evocative French acronym UMA, the community. What could be more evocative? When eventually Algeria, Libya, Mauritania, Morocco, and Tunisia came together, and there was that extraordinary occasion in Marrakesh in February 1989. I'm so lucky, and I suppose I'm here as a witness, because I was a young journalist in North Africa during that period, and I saw it. I can remember very well being down in central Casablanca as trains filled with young Algerians came into the city looking to holiday, looking to buy things. You could buy a lot more in a Moroccan shop in those days than you could in Algeria. Looking to do things, the prospects that were opened up by the extreme complementarity of the economies, Algeria, Libya with their hydrocarbons, the much more diversified economies, still rather state-controlled in those days, but still more diversified, of Morocco and Tunisia. It was a really remarkable occasion. I can remember, I think the first academic article I ever wrote was about the economic logic and the political possibilities of Maghreb Union. The problem is that the economic logic has stayed. I'm sure we're going to hear about that, those figures about the lack of cross-border trading, the fact that it's calculated, and it's all rule of thumb, isn't it? That the Moroccan economy, for example, might get a 2% surge in GDP were the border to be opened up with Algeria, which needs a lot of the kind of services that you see in the Moroccan economy, and that have made Morocco a much stronger economy in recent years. So we're back to the fact that the problems are purely political. As Dr. Abdelaziz implied, there was a strong political will to bring the region together, and that has, after its initial flowering, hasn't happened. You know, the UMA Secretariat still exists. In theory, a lot of people would like to see the UMA. I remember also at the time, or a bit later, working in Brussels in the European Commission, and they were very, very keen on that, because they could see that the UMA could be an interlocutor with the what became the European Union, just like the GCC has been seen as an interlocutor with the Europeans as well. I don't want to take too much time, because I prefer to leave and come back to questions. But I think we must address, and as I'm the only extra-regional person here, it's probably as easy for myself to do so, that the defining feature for me when we talk about Maghreb regional politics over the last 3 or 4 decades, if not more, is the fact that we have very strong nationalisms and very conflicting nationalisms. And personally, having looked and been an enthusiast for Maghreb integration over such a long time, I don't see that the situations between Algeria and Morocco are, with accepting that there could be galvanic events that are less likely and more difficult to foresee, but that it can be easily resolved. But that doesn't mean that if Algeria and Morocco are not going to see eye to eye over critical issues, be it the Western Sahara, be it systems of government, that they can't come back to a situation where they can work together and draw along the other countries in the region. We're seeing Mauritania starting to do quite well with its new gas field, but very small, fragile member of the G5 Sahel, difficult situation. Tunisia, propped up rather by the West, that is really strongly needs a success story in democratic terms from the Arab Spring. And Libya, that's just coming back from the brink from being, let's face it, a failed state. So these political situations need to be overcome. And if I can make any contribution, I think we need a degree of confidence building. Looking from the outside, it's almost like being a marriage counsellor. We're looking at a very messy divorce whose ramifications go on over the decades. But what's really necessary is finding a way to make it better for the kids. And in order for that to happen, I think we need confidence building. For example, there's a lot of debate at the moment over whether Morocco will continue to take Algerian gas through that Mediterranean gas pipeline. Well, there's an issue to talk. I've always been very pleased. We look at electricity, and it's remarkable how the whole Mediterranean development has continued. And over all the years, Algeria and Morocco and Tunisia share electricity through the Comelec organization. People can talk to each other, and by doing small steps, then perhaps we can come back from brinks that none of us wish to go over and come back to what should be the logic. The logic of the Maghreb is people speak Darija, quite a lot of them speak French as well. They're all from a similar region, colonized in a similar way. I know you have exceptions with Libya, but more or less we're in the same regional zone. Economically, there is so much complementarity between the countries that could, over 4 decades, have been so beneficial. I would say, what a waste, and we need to find ways of coming towards it. Hence why I think this seminar, Zaid, is a great idea. We need to talk about Maghreb unity. It's rather been something that we've ignored for rather too long.
Thank you very much, John. It would be lovely to hear more, perhaps later, about your experiences from the time I was still an idea in my parents' mind when the union was formed. So it'd be lovely to hear about that. Just points based on what you said to think about. The first is the colonial experience. I think that has had a huge strategic hinterland and looming cloud over events. I think the experience of the protectorate in Morocco, where the Makhzen as such stayed intact, whereas in Algeria there was a complete gutting of the social and traditional political fabrics, is very interesting. And in Tunisia, a whole different political fabric flowered after the Beylical period. That to me is very important in getting these together. The other thing is with regards to nationalism. I think, interestingly, when looking at the periods when collaboration actually worked and trust was built, is when you look at the early nationalist and independence movements of the 40s and 50s, for example, the Étoile and other such movements, where there was actually collaboration. I mean, it's no secret that when the protectorate ended in Morocco, the Algerians were, restocking, rearming, resupplying across the border. There was a lot of integration. So I think those are 2 points. And given your background, that historical spectre is very interesting. And now, Dr.
Masali Haj chose his name very carefully and very well.
Exactly. And Dr. Malik, it'd be lovely to hear about your thoughts on the politics of trade protection and how they've stifled trade in the region. I must admit that I remember fondly from my time learning from you that your lessons in this were on a Monday morning. So I have to admit, I'm not sure I absorbed everything, but I'm sure now is a good time to refresh, especially in the context of the pandemic and the effects this has had on the economies of the region.
Thank you very much, Zaid, for organizing this panel on a very important topic, a topic that is very close to my heart. I'm also thankful to the King Faisal Center for leading the initiative on this very important region and the topic. As you know, recently as well, there's been quite a lot of evidence that's coming out on how the Maghreb region is indeed one of the most underdeveloped regions in terms of economic integration. What I'm going to do is really give you some quick perspectives, and then perhaps in the Q&A session, we can take it forward. As the previous speakers have highlighted, the role of geopolitics is absolutely central to integration. Both in historical sense, because formal colonial powers, particularly France, used to play a very important role. They're still important players in the economy. Many of the French firms continue to take an important role. Many of the elites in these countries are dual nationals, for French nationality and others. So France still continues to have a huge influence, probably not as much as before, but those sort of vertical ties of integration continue. What I'm going to present today is also some ideas on a sort of vertical patterns of integration through the promotion of free trade agreements. But later. Now I want to talk a little bit more about how the outside powers have traditionally driven the integration agenda. I mean, we know in the GCC itself was partly a response to regional security concerns, particularly the Iranian Islamic Revolution. I think there's a need that we move forward towards economic development because it's also an important security concern for the world and for the region at large. We know, for example, in recent times, there's been pressure on Morocco to curtail its ties with Turkey. There are all sorts of bilateral linkages that somehow, are imposed from the outside. And I think there needs to be a greater debate, discussion, recognition within the larger region, which we call the MENA region, Middle East and North Africa, that we have to engage with outsiders, we have to engage with all international powers, but ultimately the agenda for integration should really be homegrown. John mentioned the Moroccan-Algerian relations. Again, that has always been an issue, but a way out has to be found. It's a very, very difficult issue, but obviously without it, you cannot really drive the integration agenda quite very far. Okay, without further ado then, I'm going to talk about two things. One is the sort of desirability and urgency of integration, and then how politics comes to play a role. And perhaps I'll have a few insights on practical ways forward. Everybody knows that this is the most weakly integrated regions. It will benefit a lot from regional integration. As John mentioned, there are complementarities, but something that really stands out in the case of the Maghreb region is its location. Right? Economists, when they're thinking about comparative advantage, about development, always talking about location, location, location. Well, if you think about North Africa, right, hundreds of kilometers of coastline facing Europe and the Mediterranean, and then with Africa at the back, right? Really a corridor to Europe and Africa. So, we are doing something terribly wrong that we cannot develop this region. Because if this location were given to the likes of Singapore or somewhere in Southeast Asia, you would see lots of rapid production assemblies, integration into global supply chains. You really have to do something terribly wrong in order to disrupt the very natural process of economic integration here. Now, one reason the integration agenda is urgent is that there is really no prospect for post-oil era in the region. I mean, if you think about Libya, if you think about Algeria, you cannot think about the post-oil era unless there's diversification, and there's very little room for diversification without regional integration. Yesterday the FT carried a very important story on Algeria. Things are falling apart. There's an erosion of purchasing power. We know Tunisia is stuck in the middle of a transition. There's a political transition, but there's no economic transition. We know Libya has these problems in terms of state capacity, integrating various arms of the state, and to create peace and durability. How can we tackle all these challenges without thinking about a broader framework on regional integration? And here, I think the outside powers are partly to blame as well, because a lot of the literature that came out in the 2000s on trade integration in the Arab region, it exclusively highlighted north-south patterns of integration, which should be there. But even the productivity of those patterns is linked with South-South cooperation, right? So there is the Council for Foreign Relations report that talks about, signing free trade agreements, being part of the WTO. There's the World Bank and the IMF reports, and almost all of them politely and silently sort of write off the prospects for regional integration. I think on economic terms, we might say, there are certain areas where there's not a lot of complementarity. There are geopolitical hindrances like Morocco-Algerian relations. But I think the issue demands a greater intellectual courage, imagination to think about this question. So when you think about the FTAs, I'm going to present you some evidence from Morocco of how Europe signed a trade agreement with Morocco, and the benefits of that trade agreement would largely accrued to domestic, politically connected actors. So I'm going to quickly share my screen and show you the setup that I want to explain. So here is this sort of interesting event on the Moroccan trade integration with Europe. You have this sort of Morocco-EU Trade Association Agreement, which was signed in 1996. And then in 2000, you have the Morocco-EU Free Trade Agreement that comes into force. And we look at how those sectors, the sort of four-digit manufacturing sectors that were dominated by politically connected firms, those firms that were linked with the royal family or firms that were linked with politicians, how they were already in the driving seat. And after the trade agreement, they ended up benefiting high levels of trade protection. So this gray line shows the decline in overall tariff barriers that came about. Now, in the wake of these declining tariff barriers, what you find is higher level of non-tariff barriers. So if you look at these, the dark line shows the share of sectors that were subjected to non-tariff measures, a sort of cumulative density of non-tariff measures. And for those who don't know what non-tariff measures are, well, non-tariff measures are a variety of these procedural restrictions like sanitary, phytosanitary requirements, technical specifications. All these were enforced by the EU. And you could see that after the agreement, there was a general increase in the incidence of non-tariff protection. But this increase was disproportionately higher for politically connected sectors, which is this dark line. And you could see that a lot of these went to firms that were politically connected, right? There's much higher level of protection for politically connected. And if you look at these EU regulations, you will see that a lot of these regulations were those that require authorization requirements. So you need the input of the customs authorities, or you need some administrative requirement to get past these. So in other words, what I'm trying to show here is that there was an effort to create greater EU Maghreb integration pattern, right, through the FTAs. These were useful, but for understandable reasons, these FTAs were captured by inside actors, right, who benefited from differential protection. As a result, what we saw is this rise of non-tariff barriers actually hurts regional integration. There's a fantastic report by the International Trade Center that surveyed a lot of Arab firms in the Maghreb and asked them, what is the biggest trade barrier that you face in terms of regional integration of Maghreb? And a lot of those firms are saying these are the non-trade barriers, or non-tariff barriers that really stop integration. So I will conclude here and really emphasize that we need, firstly, a new intellectual discourse that recognizes the importance of these FTAs, especially at the international level. These institutions that have a lot of convening power, the World Bank, the IMF, and so on and so forth. And the second, there needs to be recognition that whenever you have trade integration, it creates new constituencies. It democratizes economic power. And a lot of the regimes want to see only those actors becoming more economically successful who continue to be under them, right? Who do not become too big to challenge them. So that's a political challenge, and there's a politics of domestic protection which exists everywhere. So how do we come out of it? And I think there are sort of three aspects I want to raise and then conclude. I think when we say the Middle East and Maghreb in particular is less integrated, we're actually wrong. The region is hugely integrated, but in all sorts of negative ways, in refugee inflows, in smuggling corridors, cross-border trading patterns that are not in control, whole range of negative ways. I mean, today, if you look at, the spillovers from conflict in Libya to neighboring regions, they're massive, right? And so the idea that the region is not integrated, actually it is integrated. but in all sorts of negative ways. The question is, how do we convert this into a more positive cycle of integration? And there we need to learn from European and other experiences, and perhaps city to city integration, sort of border cities, and piloting them, piloting a pattern of integration where there's better movement of labor, better movement of capital, maybe some free trade zones on the border. Maybe that's that's one of the ways. And finally, I think whichever method we use, we have to recognize that globally, it's usually regions who have integrated are usually regions where elites were incentivized. They had no other option but to cooperate. And so how do we shape elite incentives is an important question that that is central for thinking about regional integration. So I'll stop there. I've already taken a lot of your time, but I thought I'll share some of these academic insights too, and look forward to your reactions. Thank you.
Dr. Malik, thank you so much. That was a magisterial overview. My points, food for thought rather, for your next comments were, number one, on the statistics on Morocco. If you look at the wider region, I'm sure you'd agree as an economist, that's probably best in class. As in, what's happened elsewhere is even worse. I mean, you try finding a banana, in the market in Algeria. There are worse examples. And then separately, I wanted to ask you, the Cologne model between the Netherlands, France, and Germany has always been, held up as a great driver of trade. I don't know if Wujda or similar, or Wahran could be similar colognes for that part of the world. And then I go to the last point, which is, I see very much so how you base your thoughts on how economic elites can benefit from no trade or different developments in trade. However, what I would love to get your opinion on next time you speak is basically how we can drive intra-Maghreb trade. How can we get everybody trading together as opposed to being concerned principally with those elites and how their perpetuation may or may not stifle trade, especially in the context of what we're seeing now, for example, Moroccan banking in Tunisia, the fact that Libyan oil has to come to Morocco by boat, et cetera, et cetera. These big limiters of trade. So without further ado, I will go to Abdul Malik Al-Alawi, who I'm sure has a lot to say, and we're very much looking forward to his.
So Zaid, thanks to the organizers. Thank you to the King Faisal Center for having this tremendous and important conversation. I'd like to use very early my joker and ask you to enter the business of slaughtering some sacred cows, because I have to say I totally agree with what just said Dr. Adil Malik, that we need a new intellectual discourse, but I would add something. We need it coming from the South and not coming from Sciences Po Paris or Oxford. Because the biggest problem that we have right now is that we have a lot of post-colonial cliches about the region, and we have a long running story about why the Maghreb is not integrated. And this story is the following. You have two countries, Morocco and Algeria, that were on two different sides during the Cold War. And those countries are competing for regional leadership. They have issues with borders. They entered an arms race. They don't like each other. And a lot of people are benchmarking the example of Europe, of saying, listen, if France and Germany got along, they were the real recipe for the success of Europe. And if Morocco and Algeria get along, there will be the success of the Maghreb. I think this is partly true, but it tells only half of the story. The roots of non-integration in the Maghreb are at the core very economic. You have two economies that are service-based, based on trade and based on a little bit of industry. It's Morocco and Tunisia. And you have two economies that are based on extractive industries, which are Algeria and Libya. The models are really, really, really different between those countries. And even though you have tremendous complementarity between Morocco and Algeria and between Tunisia and Libya. There is such a difference in culture and the economic model that even if you were to open all the doors, lift all the barriers, it will take at least a generation to see the fruits of these externalities. And what I want to say that is very important is that we need our own empowerment in terms of the business of ideas. Because what we see prevalent during those 30 last years is the speech about deep state, the Makhzen in Morocco, the army in Algeria, the police in Tunisia, and the Mukhabarat in Libya. And the reality is much more diverse and much more complex. You have civil society, you have companies from the private sector that have emerged. I'll have to maybe just tell you one thing. The first product that is exported from Morocco is cars. That's the #1 product that we export from Morocco. We have 1,600 companies that are in the business of making cars. And forgive me for correcting this, but none of these companies is connected either to the royal family or to politically connected people. So, of course, there is, in all countries that are transitioning, reflex of kleptocracy, of nepotism, of a lot of people that are trying to go into businesses that will be protected. But the reality is a little bit more diverse. And benchmarking us with Europe or saying that we're only lacking political will is half of the story here again. Because for the case of Morocco, I see, and maybe this is something that might seem counter-natural, that the non-integration was also a chance for Morocco because it obliged the country to project itself to the south and to go to sub-Saharan Africa because no growth was allowed east of the border. And maybe we would not have had this tremendous banking sector and insurance sector in the greater northwest area that is led by Moroccan banks if we had the opportunity to work with Algeria. So this is really a key aspect. We are very poor in producing content, in producing ideas about the Maghreb coming from the Maghreb. And this is the key issue because we have to buy this commodity elsewhere, and we have sometimes to buy it from centers that are coming from former colonies. And I mean, what kind of ideas can we get if we get ideas that are talking about anatomy of domination and how those countries on the southern of the Mediterranean should organize themselves? I think it's very important that we empower ourselves in the business of idea. Look at the impact of geopolitics for our countries. When the United States changed the name of the region to the MENA region, what does it mean for us? It's a huge change. In Morocco, we consider ourselves as Africans. We don't consider ourselves as Middle Easterns. But in every report that you get from the World Bank, that you get from the IMF, we are compared to countries that are very different from our economies, from our history, and from our roots. And the second thing is that when the US took the gamble of political Islam, basically they sponsored political parties that are very different from what we have in our culture. So you're right, geopolitics played a huge role, but the economy and the conflicting models between those four countries is really at the core of the fact that there is no integration between those in the Maghreb. I finished, Zaid, by the way.
Yeah, what a climax. Thank you very much, Abdul Malik. Lilia, not to disparage you in any way, but I think we've definitely saved the best till last. I would like to just to introduce your remarks in that Tunisia is often referred to as being between a rock and a hard place. And I think that's very interesting, and you will shed a lot of light on this. And also through a little of what Abdul Malik was saying about these post-colonial economic and political principles that are imposed to understand problems sometimes incorrectly, and to sometimes put what Algeria or Morocco or Tunisia would be going through in a way that Egypt may be, which Abdul Malik is saying is incorrect. So please, without further ado.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Zaid. Well, first of all, good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for the King Faisal Center for the invitation and for making me part of this important event. I was not really prepared to speak as a Tunisian, so I am a Tunisian, but you asked me a question about Tunisia specifically, and it's not necessarily what I wanted to speak about. As you said at the beginning, I'm here in my personal capacity representing the Maghreb Economic Forum, which I joined recently, but my full-time job, let's say, is working with the International Trade Center and heading the Office for Arab Region. So I was happy to hear Adel speak about the ITC report, because I worked on that report with my colleagues at ITC. If you allow me, Zaid, I would like to share my screen. A lot of what I have put in my presentation was said, but maybe I'm not going to run through it in details, but just to highlight some of the points which probably would stress what was already said or bring some new dimension to it. I hope I can do it. Voilà. And do you see my screen? Yes? Okay.
Yes, we do, yeah.
Yeah, good. So my first slide was really to set the scene or position the Maghreb in the world. And I just like this figure, which shows how much we don't appear in the map, basically, in terms of the world economy. But at the same time, these are 5 countries with 6 million square kilometers, 100 million people, all maritime countries. And as Abdel Malik was saying earlier, 2 countries primarily oil-based and 2 countries that are more diversified. And we have a common issue, which is creating jobs for an increasing young population to ensure an inclusive development and stability. This is the critical problem, really, to create a dynamic economy. We already spoke about the Maghreb Union, so I'm not going to go about that, but I just wanted to mention the fact that it is true that the Maghreb Union is the least integrated. At the same time, maybe the differences in economic model that was followed by the different countries was actually an opportunity over the years, because if we look at the exports of Tunisia and the imports of Algeria, and this is just one example and it can be multiplied, we can see that many of the products that Tunisia was exporting to the world were actually imported by Algeria. So the problem is why this exchange did not happen between the 2 countries and why it didn't take place, and it was not actually exploited to develop and help and support the economic development of the countries. And I think there are 3 probably critical areas that we should look at, and some of them were mentioned. One of them is all the different trade agreements that the 5 countries are in. We are all the 5 countries are part of many. They are all part of the Maghreb Union, but they are all part of different agreements, whether bilateral or multilateral, which have different rules. So which rules apply? What do you use when you start trading? When Tunisia starts trading with Morocco, do you use AMU? Do you use GAFTA? Do you use something else? It's very difficult to distinguish. So at the end, these agreements are actually not implemented and not used properly. The second is the bilateral agreements with the EU, and this is mainly for Algeria, Morocco, and Tunisia. And it is true that les accords association agreement have opened up the market to the EU, and it shows how that has influenced the trade relationship between the Maghreb countries and the European Union. The European Union is a dominating market, basically, which limits a lot the exchange between the Maghreb Union. So this basically shows that the relationship was more favored and more encouraged and supported towards a good relationship with the EU, but not so much across the countries on the southern part. And then the last, the last 2 factors, I think, that have created this kind of situation. One factor that Dr. Malik talked about, which are the non-tariff barriers and the trade obstacles that exist across the region. And many of them are cited by many companies, such as the custom clearance and administrative procedures, the rules of origin, etc. But one important factor is the infrastructure. We don't have an infrastructure that covers the 5 countries or links the 5 countries. So from the World Bank Logistic Performance Indicator, we see that there are some of the countries in the region there, and we see there are very low performance. Someone said earlier the oil should go, to go from Libya to Morocco would need to go by sea, but there are no maritime link between the countries. So you go to Europe and come back, how much does that cost? This is really inefficient. So these are areas that we should look at more in depth and really analyze to be able to find solutions for a more integrated Maghreb. From my point of view, I think what is needed, of course, today, with the crisis and with the COVID-19 and the pressure on the fiscal resources and the financial resources, I think financing is a key word. And the financing should go for integrated infrastructure that really helps to link the countries, and infrastructure that helps the South-South and North-South relationship. Another idea that was actually presented by the Center for Mediterranean Integration recently in the study that they published recently is this Africa-Mediterranean-Europe axis, which will put the Mediterranean countries in the middle of this integration path between Europe and Africa. And that way, we are not on the periphery, but we are really in the middle, and we can actually use better our capabilities and facilitate the flow of technology, of skills, of innovation, and really build up a new set and new rules for the economy. And then the final point I wanted to mention is really to develop regional value chains, because the COVID showed that depending on few suppliers and depending on few countries that are producing the final products is really a big threat and puts all countries in a very vulnerable situation. So we need, all the countries are driving this diversification move and trying to bring closer the value chains and the production capacity so that they have access to the products when they need them, and they are not interrupted because in a specific region, there is an interruption or disruption. And my final slide, and this is coming from ITC, this shows the intra-regional potential within North Africa. This is using the export potential map of ITC. And the estimation is that we have a potential of $375 million of export potential that is not being used. And these are products that are being produced by the different countries in the region. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Lilia. Fantastic. I'm going to encourage everybody watching, please send your questions so I can put them forward to our speakers. Lilia, I'll start with you. So, a pitiful 2% of GDP in the Maghreb region is from intra-regional trade. I wondered, from the international organizational perspective, what are the challenges the large international organizations face in dealing with the Maghreb from outside in? That's how I want to start. What is it day to day that makes it really hard? And then the point you raised about conflicting legal and trade frameworks, I will ask Dr. Malik, but I'd like your opinion first. When you're in Geneva, what are the big headaches with regards to increasing trade with the Maghreb?
I think some of these factors have already been mentioned. I think there is the political will, of course, that is needed. Are you talking about the trade between the Maghreb countries, right?
Yeah, and what does the international community? How is it a difficult place for the international community, for example, to work? Let's say Facebook. The region is incredibly important to Facebook. What do you think companies like that are challenged by when setting up a regional HQ or similar?
I mean, we can all look at the World Bank doing business and how difficult it is to set up a business or to enter and do business in any of the countries. It may be a little bit difficult. I think one of the key areas that comes back all the time from from foreigners or local companies is really the heaviness of administrative procedures, and the fact that it is not always documented and very lengthy. So the administrative part is really very difficult, but this is where we come in. If I put my ITC hat on, this is where we come in to look at these kind of hurdles and try to work with the institutions to alleviate them and really restructure their procedures and the requirements so that it makes trade much easier. But of course, this also needs a political, as I said earlier, a political will and really a willingness to look at the difficulties from a different eye and bring that change in. And I can't remember your second question. I'm sorry.
No, I think you hit them both on the head there. I will just go from what you said to what Dr. Malik is always writing about in practice. Dr. Malik, with that plethora of agreements and deals that the various countries have signed bilaterally with others, where do you start if you want to import or export? Which takes precedence? Surely this you can understand why the countries went into all of these agreements because they have prospects to increase trade. But how are these barriers and what should take precedence? Should they all sign up to a new model? What are your thoughts? You're on mute, Doctor.
My first thought is that I think countries are often very keen to sign these agreements, but very difficult to follow up. And one of the reasons for it is that there's not enough sort of agency or incentives from the top, unless it becomes an existential concern that you have to do it. You cannot survive without it. It becomes difficult. And we've seen, for example, in Morocco, exasperated by the absence of integration opportunities horizontally, it's going down south, right, towards sub-Saharan Africa and creating a new model of integration. But again, that has come right from the very top, right? And the big companies in Morocco have invested. There are diplomatic relations that are being established. I mean, a lot of industrial policy today is foreign policy, right? So look at where the Chinese president flies, there are like 200 businessmen with them. If a couple of years back when Turkish president was traveling to Africa or to Pakistan or other regions, he's going with 200 companies, right? And a lot of those companies have direct say into foreign ministries, they're driving the agenda, their new constituencies being born. So I think the first thing is really a more incentive and interest from the top when these leaders think that there's no other way to survive. The second is that I think perhaps we need to go from a very centralized process where several countries agree together to a small incubators. And that's why I said city to city integration. Maybe there are one or two sectors or there are one or two regions which can gradually open up in ways that is incentive compatible for them, that creates an industrial platform, and then it grows. I was reading the other day about Bangladesh garment export success. It just came through a very simple agreement between Devo and one of the regime insiders in Bangladesh way back in time. They set up a factory, it grew, it created spillovers, and gradually it started expanding, right? So if we can think about a city-to-city integration model, a gradual process, that would be very good. There's another point I want to make, which is that there are barriers to regional integration, yes, but a lot of those barriers to regional integration are simply barriers to business development, which Lilia said, how to set up a firm, administrative measures, how to enforce regulations, clearance on customs authorities, right? Those little hiccups that domestic businesses face are also the barriers to regional integration. The problem is a lot of those businessmen, if you go and speak with businesses in Morocco, they will tell you concrete stories about how 2 or 3 small steps can unlock things, right? But their voice never really goes up, right? You need to aggregate, you need to create these small organizations, put them together. So maybe if there is a business association in Morocco, put them in touch with business association in Algeria or Tunisia or Libya, right? And then they start talking, highlighting these specific barriers, And then there should be a government or some high-level forum that really takes that into consideration. That's how things proceed. And I think it's doable. It's perfectly doable, but it requires greater interest. And my sense is, unless there is fire under the feet of the rulers, that they cannot survive without this, it will be very, very difficult.
Thank you, Dr. Malik. I mean, in the last decade, there has been a fair amount of fire. I think in 3 of the Maghreb countries, there's been popular uprising or civil war. So I'm not sure if there's any more that can be done in that regard, but I am interested in the fact that you think that there should be a central enactor of change. Through the pandemic, we've seen various tech and digital collaboration from young people in business across the region, because tech has no borders. But I mean, in a region where, according to some statistics, $500 billion is lost because of the lack of trade, not complementary, no, but in terms of the barriers, I think it's very, very unfortunate. What are your thoughts with regards to what this central entity should be? Should it be the Maghreb Union, or should there just be a break from the past? Because it seems like the whole organization has just completely lost impetus. In 2017, the King of Morocco called it dead. So if it's not dead, it's certainly paralyzed. So I wonder what your thoughts are on the institutional side.
Yes, I mean, there are different models available across the world. I think the region needs to have its own model, which is very much cognizant of the constraints. So I would say, let's say in the Maksan or in the King's office or in the government's office, there is a little unit which deals with these day-to-day issues. Brings, a lot of the problem is about collating information, right? And creating the platform, as Lilia said. You first need to create the platform for connectivity, which is infrastructure. In the second stage, you need to remove these small hurdles, right? Which keep the whole supply chain unintegrated. So I think it would be less about regional secretariats, more about working groups, where you have both businessmen, but also people who implement and people who remove bottlenecks, right? And that's been the case in Southeast Asia too, right? So if you look at Malaysia, if you look at a lot of these, even in Vietnam, right? There are offices right under the nose of the Prime Minister. You could just step out and go into the other room and see what's happening, what are the constraints, and there's a real-time interest in resolving those.
Dr. Malik, going back to what is the raison d'etre of this conversation, whether the differences in development lend themselves towards more integration. What are your views on that? Are the trade complementarities between the Maghreb countries better because they're at different stages of development? I note the fact that, the dream of Maghreb Unionists that Algerian hydrocarbons could, fuel phosphate manufacture in Morocco and vice versa, and Moroccan fruit and veg could be supplying Algeria, etc., etc. And just in the way that Moroccan banks are doing a roaring business in Tunisia, that the developmental differences lend themselves to that. And you have examples of where that happened. Dr. Abdelaziz began by saying, when the GCC was founded, Oman had a handful of roads. Oman was, in a really dire situation, and the UAE was a very poor country. 70% of adults had tuberculosis in the UAE. When it was founded. So I just wondered if you thought the stark developmental differences are having an issue. I don't know if you saw a recent Economist piece called "Broken Down Country," lamenting how a 3-year-old car in Algeria is more expensive than a brand new car in Morocco because of what's changing developmentally. So I just wanted to ask you that before I jump to our other speakers.
Right. So, I must profess my ignorance. I don't work at too fine-grained a level in terms of sectoral work. But there are complementarities, absolutely, and you've provided excellent number of examples. I would, however, highlight 2 or 3 issues. One is, Algeria is a bit like It's still surviving in the old socialist communist era, right? Exchange controls, restrictions on everything, authorization requirements, but it's a big country. And if that country awakens, it can lift the whole region, right? So it's just waiting to be to be waken up properly in economic and political terms. Um, in terms of complementarity, look, economists take a static view and a dynamic view. Static view is if you look at different industries today, where do you see greater complementarity in terms of sectors? Some countries have natural resources, others lack them, and so on and so forth. But there's also a dynamic concept of complementarity, right? A lot of countries that created complementarities and linkages, they created by connecting infrastructure, right? So there's a great example that Albert Hirschman gives about a US road. There was massive investment in that bridge. People thought all of that investment is going to waste until several years down the line, it became the primary conduit for trade across various regions. There is, for example, a road now being built with the Chinese support that will connect Algiers to Lagos, right? Now, maybe if there is more integration amongst the Maghreb, you see a greater pattern intra-Maghreb, but then also with Africa, and maybe French firms and German firms will find it useful, as you said, to headquarter themselves into these countries. So this whole idea of complementarities is a very dynamic conception, right? It's a conception that changes over time. And in there, I think the moral economy is absolutely central. We are talking about modern times. But way back in history, if you look at the Zaviyas, if you look at these different religious, spiritual movements, for them, it was a same sort of integrated space, right? There were Hajj routes that survived through it. There were cities that survived through it, right? And those were complementarities, right? So if you look at all these Zaviyas and different kinds of Sufi movements that thrived, they built on those conceptions. But of course, there's free mobility of labor. One of the key issues is that we need to make people-to-people exchanges easier, right? And it's amazing. For example, now in Oxford, I've been given the charge to develop an initiative, and it's amazing when I talk to different different departments within the university. We have £5,000 for something, and then somebody else joins in, and it grows and grows, and it's just beautiful. There is real miracle in connecting and complementing this, and the very basic target for us should be easier movement of people. You see, for me today, it's easier to travel to Algeria, to Morocco, to Tunisia, but it's a lot more difficult for Maghrebis to travel in these countries.
Yeah, I really like that, and I love the Zawiya parallel. I mean, for me, I'm seeing a lot of that with the Moroccan expansion in West Africa, particularly. If you look historically, Fez was the religious center of that part of the world. And from there all the way east, there was nothing apart from Kairouan in Tunisia and then Al-Azhar, nothing else in between. And I like the way how it's almost a rediscovery of that movement of people, along with salt routes, etc., which we're envisaging. I don't know if you've ever seen the old French tourism posters of Morocco, but they show Marseille to Morocco in 2 days on a boat and then a train from Algeria. I mean, just when you think about that today, there's no way, you could enjoy that rail experience now. But I think it's almost rediscovering that free movement.
Absolutely. And I think it's very important when Abdul Malik talked about, a homegrown discourse. I think this moral economy is absolutely central, because if you look at the Sanusi Sufi order that connected North Africa with Sub-Saharan Africa was a hugely important initiative. But let us not be very simplistic here, because if you were to revive these connections, they pose a geopolitical threat. It would be a geopolitical threat. It would be a political threat, because if you just study the story of Sanusi movement, it created a tough time to outside powers, and it created new patterns of political settlements, moral communities. They are not going to be geopolitically neutral. But I think if we are going to have a homegrown discourse, we need that discourse, because it would create greater acceptability amongst people, amongst religious parties, and it's also a homegrown experience for integration.
Sure, I think that's different, and that's definitely the case. And there are a lot of these transnational figures, especially in the early 20th century. The Emir Abdul Qadir. I mean, if you'd asked him at the time, where were you born, he probably would have told you Morocco, as in, and he's an Algerian, independence figure. And similarly, the holy man in Tunis, Sidi Bou Said al-Baji, was from Portugal. You know what I mean? So no, I totally see that, and I think the Sunusi movement is a fantastic example. I'm going to let Abdul Malik comment slightly on the trade complementarities, but I also want to get his and John's views on the historical spectre of conflict and political disagreement, which kind of blew the wind out of the sails of the Maghreb Union, because I think the festering wound here is the Saharan question. And I think that is the greatest inhibitor to union. And I think if there was a slightly more nuanced understanding view on the Algerian side, in line with the demands of what the people want from the Iraq, which is development over, these rather bizarre, Castro-like foreign policy decisions, I think that would allow the region to move on in a way that it hasn't because of this stifling conflict. So I'll let Abdul Malik talk about trade, and then perhaps we'll look at more at the historical, political inhibitors here.
Okay, so then trade, politics, and the Sahara, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so for trade, I would like to point out a virus that struck the Maghreban elites way before COVID. It's the McKinsey virus. That we are all strategists in the Maghreb. We think very clearly. We have very strong and sound ideas about the vision, about an integrated Maghreb. But as Dr. Malik pointed out, there is an execution problem. That we don't have people that are able to get the job done. And if you look at all of the hurdles you spoke about, red tape, judicial and fiscal consistency, which is something very, very important for foreign direct investments. I was in the Moroccan committee that worked on the doing business in Morocco, and we've been fighting for 10 years to get the suppression of something rather bizarre that you get in Morocco, which is to legalize your signature. For 10 years, there was intense debate of why should we take a commercial document or a lease or any document to a civil servant to put a stamp on it. And everybody was telling in this committee that it was not possible to remove it because of control. At the era of scanners and high-level resolution scanners, you can forge a signature very easily. And those guys were still stuck on the fact that you need to go to a public office in order to legalize a signature. And then something weird happened. COVID came. And there was no possibility to legalize those signatures. And the Ministry of Finance removed the obligation to have legalization of signature. And then they totally removed it in March, and nothing happened. Morocco did not collapse. And business is going even more smoothly, and you can upload and download your documents without ever meeting anyone that can ask you for a bribe. So I think the key issue here is how do we make implicit rules that needs a curve of experience for the foreign investor, explicit rules. We need to enter our countries in the era of explicit rules. As long as we stay in implicit rules, and that you need a whole set of skills and of stuff that is unknown to the public when you want to do business in our countries, we will not move forward. So I would say this is the first hurdle that we need absolutely to lift. The second thing is that we need, and I totally agree with some of my colleagues, we need something big, bold, and hairy, a global initiative. I don't know, a pan-Maghreban railway will make sense because it will enable to move goods and people from west to east and to east to west. A pan-Maghreban highway as well. A pan-Maghreban solar plan. I know that was the German plan in the early years of 2000. But you need something with infrastructures, because our mental set in the Maghreb is that we are not very good at immaterial things. We are very good at material things. We need concrete, we need brick and mortar. If you get infrastructures, it's something that will connect all of those countries. And if you get it with a train, or you get it with a railroad, or you get it with energy, then you will get the positive externalities to create the sense of urgency for people to work together, because they will only work together if they have the infrastructure and they have the sense of urgency, and it creates additional value. So this is my point of view on the trade. And I think that foreign investors, when they come to our countries, they don't set up shop for their regional HQ in Morocco or in Algeria or in Tunisia. They put it in Mauritius, because that's the best place for them to trade in the three countries. They don't have any problems either with the Moroccans or the Algerians. And none of them will tell them, why did you put your headquarters in Algiers and why did you put it in Casablanca? So business is pragmatic, and global business is very pragmatic and likes fiscal incentives. On the second issue about politics, I would have to say that, you know, it touches even my personal history. My father was in the Moroccan Liberation Army. He supplied guns to the Algerian movements. All of those guys were living together in Saint-Germain-des-Prés in Paris. They visited Habib Bourguiba when he was in jail in an island. I mean, those guys were fighting against a common adversary or a common enemy. What happened after is that geopolitics had an interest in keeping those countries divided. And there was such a struggle and such different histories between Morocco and Algeria and Tunisia, and such different paths, that the only way forward was to diverge. And going to the Saharan question, I must say, you all know that I will be biased in this question because I'm Moroccan. But I can just, you know, state very simple things. A resolution, a peaceful and political resolution of the Sahara question is something that is urgent and needed if we want to stabilize the region. And I believe that beyond the antagonism between Morocco and Algeria, Moroccans, of course, they made mistakes in their relationships with Algeria. Algerians made mistakes in their relationship with Morocco. But the core issue is very simple, and if you look at WikiLeaks, you can find this, and it's amazing. It's a discussion between Kissinger and President Bouteflika, who was at this time Minister of Foreign Affairs of Algeria. This discussion happened in 1974. And Kissinger told him, listen, those guys are nomads. They don't even know that they are in Sahara. What are you doing, guys, in this region? So from the Moroccan point of view, this question of decolonization and the responsibility of Spain in this issue and the responsibility of a neighbor is something that touches our core nationalism. It's a non-negotiable issue. Once you have this on the table, all the rest can be discussed. And as the late King Hassan II said, we can discuss everything except the flag and except stamps. And I think that there is a generous offer on the table that will give a way out to everybody with their heads up. We just need some direct discussion, and this is my personal position. We need direct discussion between Rabat and Algiers. We don't need a broker for this discussion. We need direct discussions between the two parties involved in this conflict.
Thank you, Abdul Malik. I agree with some of the things you say, actually all of them, but with regards to discussion and the divergence that happened after the post-colonial era, this is very, very important. I would like to get John's opinion as well. I've made this comment to you in the past. I've also discussed it with John when I was trying to get him to take part. I don't know what the historic hinterland of Morocco, in that, especially in the minds of the region, it is called the Maghreb. It is called Maghreb, and the area is called Maghreb. And I just wonder if that prohibits discussions, and in the same way that it is a fait accompli that the GCC is headquartered in Saudi Arabia, if in the same case that the Maghreb Union will be centered on the Maghreb. I mean, I really don't know. A lot of the countries of the region were very worried when the late King Hassan spoke about potentially a single currency. This, like you said, on the issue of stamps and flags, that's something which is, almost along the same lines. John, to introduce your comments, I will mention the words of the late Bourguiba, since Abdul Malik just mentioned him, and he likened the Maghreb to the late King Hassan as a bird, as a cockerel, and the proud crest of the cockerel was Tunisia, the body of the animal was Algeria, and the slightly dirty tail feathers were Morocco. King Hassan, with customary aplomb, replied, "I agree with the Avarian analogy. However, this bird can only be a peacock." So I will leave you with that.
That's a very, very, very good way to come in. You posed the question about the Ummah as an organization before, and it's fascinating listening to everyone. Adil Malik talking about the small steps, and that's clearly there. And I very much took on board as well from the conversations what Abdul Malik Alawi was talking about before, the very different business cultures. And that is clear, and I'd completely agree. That will take a very long time to wind itself out. But I think it's not just Sciences Po, Oxford, or South Coast of England perception that it is still the politics that are overwhelming here. And the problem to be resolved is, will we eventually see a solution in the Sahara? I don't know. It has been something that's been through my entire life, as from being an international relations student, where we discussed the colonial boundaries and the issue a very long time ago, to when there was still a hot war on, being on both sides of the wall. I think I'm still, until the Gurgerat episodes recently, I held the record as being the last person to be shot at down there. Certainly the UN guys thought I was. So it is very long standing. And what we have to do is look possibly outside this issue, as people have been trying to say, to find a way forward. But there are some positives. The question that people are talking about big ticket infrastructure, and obviously I have a company that spends its time working on African infrastructure issues. Always difficult, but it strikes me there's actually a lot of infrastructure already in place. Is Abdul Malik's idea of the Trans-Maghreb train is a great one, and the lines have improved. It's always been possible to do. It is the fact that the borders are shut that has stopped it. You could go from Tunis all the way across Algeria. You could have those splendid moments on the high plateau on those trains where the small boys come and throw stones at you while you sit in the window, and come into Morocco. The Algerians built the East-West Highway, hugely controversial project. The bribes involved that went with the Chinese contractors and their Algerian allies, I believe, still hold the world record percentage of bribes on a project. But the fact is that road is there. There are motorways. I mentioned the GME, the gas pipeline that goes from Algeria through Morocco to Spain. There's the Trans-Mediterranean pipeline that passes from Algeria through Tunisia. There's actually already a lot of infrastructure in place. And what I think we see, and this is why I think getting this panel together, Zayed, is a really good idea, is we see a lot of wasted time. We're talking about gas pipelines. People have got their rival pipeline projects, but actually there's a lot of things that could be done together. Now, in order to bring that together, I don't think I would quite write the Ummah off yet, because it may be very moribund, but it seems to me, offer a structure that articulates the fact that there are 5 nations with a community of interest. I mean, clearly the core of that are Algeria, Morocco, and Tunisia, and that it could provide a platform if there was some political will. And indeed, if people want to get around serious bilateral questions, that doesn't necessarily mean that they can't meet and actually be quite positive in a regional organization, provided the vibe is positive enough. So I'd think so. One point on the Umma Bourguiba, and in fact Ben Ali was in by the time the Umma started. But actually, if you remember, the Umma Secretariat was based in Tunis. And that felt like the ideal place, because not only did you have one of the smaller states, but it was one that had a very strong understanding, I think, of all the other players that were involved. But also it benefited very much from the Tunisians' rather silky at that stage commercial skills, and actually made highlighting the benefits you could have from the business as well as from the cultural exchanges.
I like your comments, John, and I also see, like, as a traveller, how you can see the direct similarities, and I think everybody just needs to take that macro view and see the similarities, definitely, especially people to people. Lilia, there's a question here from Salim Atmani with regards to this issue not needing to be the preserve of politicians, but needing to be opened up to, as I said, to the people. With your Tunisian hat on, as it were, do you think that the role of the public in basically getting around, doing what they need to do, waking up, going to a meeting in Casablanca, coming back, and having another meeting in Algiers, is that something that should be opened up? Because the almost astonishing, until today, 10 years after, truth of what happened in Tunis through popular will, almost the impossible having happened, has shown, and not failing. I mean, Tunisia has not descended into civil war. It might have its own economic problems, but it is a positive, comfortable place to be. Very, very proactive. The role of highest role of the Arab woman in the whole of the Arab world, etc., education, healthcare. I wondered what your views were on this issue for too long being the preserve of a handful of leaders.
First of all, I want to say hello to Slim, and thank you for the question. Second, maybe I'm not going to answer necessarily as a Tunisian. Again, I'm not speaking from my Tunisian perspective. Sure. But just to say that I liked what Adil was saying earlier. I think the Maghreb will be built on this with smaller steps, and maybe city to city, and people moving and putting pressure. And I personally think that the pressure can come from the business sector because there is interest, and there's interest for the business sector to create this integration. And someone was saying earlier, the Maghreb is much more integrated than we think. It is true, because a lot of the things are happening informally. You have a lot of cross-border trade, but it's not showing up in the numbers. So maybe we need to look at that, and we need to look at the details, and really get the business sector more in the driving seat. Having said that, I think it's important for the politicians to listen to the business sector, and for the politician to open up, because at the end of the day, they are the ones sitting around the table and negotiating any agreement or any harmonization or infrastructure or whatever it is that has to go across the countries. So that dialogue has to take place, and that dialogue, even if it is led and pushed by and lobbied for by the business sector, it has to find an open ear and a willingness on the other side to take it forward and really implement it. Thank you.
I'm conscious of time. There's a question for Abdul Malik, and then I'm just going to ask you all to conclude in short statements. Abdul Malik, a question for you. I don't know why it says it's from me, but it's for you. It says, do you think Algeria will ever give up on the Western Sahara for want of better economic ties?
I'm very bad at the business of predictology, especially when it's talking about a foreign country. I hope they will do it not for want of better economic ties. I hope they will do it for reasons that are more objective than merely economic interests, and that common ground could be found for the benefit of the people that are living in the Tindouf region.
Thank you. That was to the point. I similarly think that the experiences of this last year have made integration almost an inevitability, and hopefully something that we will see. I am just going to ask. Maha told me that Prince Turki Faisal may have been watching. If he wants to submit a question, he is most welcome as our host. And separately, I want to conclude with a quick tour de table of all of you. And Dr. Malik, if you want to start with just a minute of summarizing, followed by John, Lilia, Abdul Malik, and then I'll leave Dr. Abdelaziz to conclude.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I don't think I have anything more to say except for the fact that I think we need more conversations of this sort. And perhaps next time, it would be useful to bring in members of businesses and talk about their experiences, maybe business associations. I think these conversations are extremely important and they help to create that discourse. And in that regard, I'm very happy to offer our premises here at Oxford Department of International Development, Oxford Center for Islamic Studies. If people want to come here and engage in these conversations, both the issue of economic diversification and regional integration is very dear to us. And we are happy to learn and contribute to this process.
That's lovely. And perhaps with the help of Abdul Malik or Lilia, we could do a complementary visit on the other side in either Tunis or in Rabat to really get the regional voice as well. But thank you very much. I know the Islamic Center is exactly the place where this should happen. There are great facilities and people that are really dedicated to increasing trade between Islamic countries. Lilia?
Yes, thank you. Maybe my conclusion is to say that we have today a unique opportunity to really open up and make this integration happen because of the whole dynamic that was brought up by COVID-19 and the crisis that we have lived through. I think it's very important that that these conversations are important, but I think these conversations should drive concrete actions to really make this happen and help not necessarily just integrate the Maghreb countries, but really have this integration across the Mediterranean. It is for to the benefit of all countries around the Mediterranean, but it is also to the benefit of our own development and a shared prosperity across the African continent. We have tools that are available, which is digitalization. We have the willingness to rethink this whole business of value chains and the production and industrialization and all of that. And I think it's a unique opportunity and it should be seized. Thank you.
Thank you, Lilia. I think it's really great to get that kind of passion. John?
It's a question for the politicians to resolve and business to work together. Certainly business working together, I'm sure would love to. Every time I've been in many, many meetings where different groups of people, the electricians, for example, or whatever, there's a lot of positivity. I wanted us to end with an emotional point. And that is to say, with my other love and the hat on of football, there is no one more parochial than your average football fan. And I remember my pleasure when Leicester City won the Premier League of seeing that Morocco's informal textile industry so quickly started producing Leicester City shirts with Mahrez on the back of the Algerian player. And I'd often thought about this afterwards. And then 2 years ago, when there was the last African Cup of Nations, in several cafes, in several places around Morocco, I watched with great delight as the crowds in the cafe watching the Algerian team as well as the Moroccan team and cheering them on, which really quite surprised me. You know, this is a region, you've mentioned it, whether it be the Sanusis, whether it be the Qadriya, whether it be whatever, whether it be support for Riyad Mahrez, that has a remarkable integrity and history and emotional drive. And I think once that is released, then the other details around it can be made to happen.
I love the footballing analogy, and I think you'll remember very recently how Zinedine Zidane had the same epithet, as he was a regional hero, not so much an Algerian or French one. Abdul Malik, final word?
My final word in 1 minute, all taxes included. If you guys can pull it off to bring in to a similar conversation the head of the Business Association of Algeria, I'll make it my mission for 2021 to bring you Shakib Lalej, the head of the Moroccan Business Association, to this conversation. So we have to get into the business of executing willpower and our common ambition to have businesses work together in the region.
I really like that as a point to move forward from. Just this panel that I look at today was, incredible, a credible meeting of minds, and I'm really impressed that we were able to bring it together. I will separately work with you to try and make that happen, along with Dr. Malik, who I think has the kudos, and Lilia, who has the institutional kind of framework to let that happen as well. I think on a final note, the last moment these countries could have called themselves as being part of a similar state was the Muwahideen and the Murabitin dynasties. And I think it's no historical coincidence that those dynasties meant respectively the uniting dynasty and the tying together dynasty. The words in Arabic Muwahid and the words in Arabic Murabit mean exactly just that. So these dynasties that serve first and foremost, that their raison d'etre was to be unifying movements, saw the region, peak at that period. These were people with a similar culture who had no problem being in, what we can call a shared state as such. And I think it's an important historical lesson. Dr. Abdelaziz, thank you so much. I know you're a very busy man, and I know from experience that there is nobody else in that building right now, only you, and they've all left. So thank you very much for being, the last man standing. Thank you to the King Faisal Center. Thank you to Prince Turki Faisal for suggesting this. And thank you all. Dr. Abdelaziz, if you have anything to say, otherwise we're good. You're on mute, sir.
From first, that I learned a lot from the discussion, and I was reflecting some of the issues on our experience. The GCC had its share of border issues, and we realized early on that you really cannot have integration in the real sense without connectivity, without free movement of people, free movement of goods. And as I listened, you talked about the border issues between Algeria and Morocco. Integration will remain theoretical unless you address that issue. Of course, also mobility, I think, between Libya and the rest of the countries in the Union are also limited by security concerns, and probably between Tunisia and Algeria. So I think it's very important to address connectivity. You can sign all the agreements in the world without connectivity, without mobility, you will not achieve very much. And the second issue also we had, and as I said, the border disputes can go on parallel track. They take a long time to resolve. There are ways of doing them. Our member states in the GCC, almost all of them had border disputes in the beginning. The British made sure to leave those issues for us, but we were able to address them and resolve them. They're not impossible to resolve, but they shouldn't limit our integration. They shouldn't stop us from moving forward. The second issue, also from our experience with North Africa, we organized several, I think 6 or 7 investment conferences between the business community here and the business community in Morocco and Tunisia. And one of the issues that came back was about the the colonial legacy in a way. We suffered the same here in the beginning of the GCC integration, that while the UK actually supported the formation of the GCC and supported our integration efforts, it really took some time to undo the 200 years of divide and rule policies of the UK. And I feel there may be something, maybe not similar, but there may be a legacy also, a colonial legacy in North Africa. From what we heard from our business community, is that there is an entrenched, privileged position for former colonial powers in North African countries that made it difficult to break into some of the sectors. And we raised that in some of the formal meetings, that we need to have equal treatment if we are going to be able to invest in North Africa, and also to have greater trade. Again, I really don't know exactly how to resolve that, but it's important, I think, to keep it in mind. And as I said, it took us a while, it took us maybe 2-3 decades to deal with the colonial legacy in the GCC, and hopefully it won't take that long in North Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you to the King Faisal Center, and I hope to see you all soon. Thank you very much. Wonderful.